Hi guys, it's Corrine. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today we're making a very simple and sweet Valentine's Day card that will hold a couple gift cards, and I also made a handmade envelope to go with it using my We Are Memory Keepers envelope punch board. I started with some Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock. This is a very heavyweight, very smooth cardstock. And I'm using my scoreboard to score it down the middle. I cut it to 9 by 5.5. So my final card will be a 5.5 by 4.5 card. I pulled out some Post-it tape and I'm going to add that right above the score line because I'm going to be ink blending on the front of my card and I did not want any of that ink to get on the back of my card. The stencil I pulled out is, I wrote on there Studio Katia, but I was wrong. It's a Simon Says Stamp Tumbling Heart stencil. And for that, I'm trying to decide what ink to use. Right away, I thought about using Picked Raspberry, but I went ahead and looked through my swatches to see if there was another pink that I liked maybe a little bit better. But in the end, I just stuck with Picked Raspberry. It is my favorite Distress Oxide pink color. I also pulled out my blending brush and a microfiber towel. The blending brushes I purchased off Amazon, and I think I got a 5-pack for about $11, super cheap, and I absolutely love them. They're a game changer when you're ink blending. So I didn't really need to tape this down, but I also didn't want it to move. So I'm using some painter's tape, taped it to my work surface. And I'm going to load up my brush with ink. I do have a scrap piece of paper to pounce that off on so I don't get any real harsh edges. So I'll get a lot of ink on my brush, pounce that off on my scrap paper, and then just blend that onto my paper. It just goes on so smooth on this paper. I'm going in circular motions, going one way and then back the other way. You can get a really light application if you wanted, but I wanted more of a darker application. You can even go darker than what I do here. So this card is for my son. I know it's a little bit girly, but it's the card I wanted to make. I think he'll just appreciate the gift cards in it. So now I will clean up my work surface. I just have a bottle of alcohol on my work surface, and that works to clean everything up. I'm working on a glass mat from We Are Memory Keepers, which I absolutely love. I purchased that from HSN for a really good price as well. And that is, I think it's 24 by 18. So now I wanted to ink blend a piece of matching cardstock that I could cut out with this die. I'm using a Crafter's Companion Gemini stitched edge heart, nesting hearts dies, and I think that's the 5th largest in it. I'm pouncing off at the top of that because I only need the middle to be really concentrated. And I did tape that down to an old Cricut mat because that I did not want to move because I was going to be pressing pretty hard to get that deep color that I wanted. So really you should let this dry or heat set it, but I was kind of in a rush. I needed to get this out in the mail today. So I'm just taping that down, running that through my Vagabond, and then it's got that beautiful stitch detail on the edge here. And that matches perfectly with the stenciled hearts on the front of my card. So I pulled out some glitter paper and I'm going to cut 2 of the same hearts here. I want this heart to go off the edge of my card and I just want a frame of it. So I'm just going to cut this out, die cut it. And the back of this glitter paper has like a waxy base to it. So I'm going to use a little ATG tape to adhere that down. That'll temporarily adhere it in place so I can get the frame that I want. So I'm going to use the next smaller size die and tape that down. I'm going to put that on that microfiber because I don't want it ruining the paper. So I don't want it sticking too much to it. And then I ran that through my die cut machine. And now I can take off that frame, and eventually I will adhere it with some wet glue, being that it has a waxy finish on the back. Wet glue works best for this paper. I love this silver paper. So that easily came up. And now I'm going to add some transparency paper behind it. I purchased this probably 10 years ago and I still have so much from it, and it was cheap. I'm going to use the same die, run that through my die cut machine, and again adhere that down with, this works well with either double-sided adhesive, but I like using wet glue. I'm using some art glitter glue in a fine tip bottle and just going right around the edge there, and I'll place down the transparency. And then using the same glue, I'm adding my heart frame to it. Now I'm going to be adding that pink inked heart behind it. You could have done that before you added the transparency, but it's really easy to line up. So I'm just going to add some glue behind it, use my tweezers after I fold it and give it a good crease with my bone folder. Again, this is really thick paper. It makes great card bases. And see, I just lined that up behind there and pressed it down. Super simple. But you could have done that through the opening before adding the transparency if you wanted to. So now that I'm happy with that, I'll just cut off the excess. And now I'm going to add another die to both the front and inside piece. I decided to go with the smaller die that comes in that nested set. Again, that gives it a nice stitched edge. And I'm going to add that with wet glue, but I'm only going to use the wet glue on the left side of the heart so it doesn't show through on that acetate. And from the back, it looks great. It doesn't look bad at all. I could have added another heart to the inside to sandwich it and kind of cut it, but I thought it looked great. So I did cut a second heart just like that one, and I will add the wet glue and match it up to the inside using that little window from the acetate to match it up. I'll press down the back of my card and it matches up perfectly. Super simple. So I'm pulling out my Misty stamping tool, and I also pulled out a stamp from Studio Katia. It's the Kobe's Hugs and Kisses. I'm using the words love you with an exclamation mark in it or to it. And I am using my Misty stamping corners, excuse me, my corner pieces to line up my sentiment to get it straight. And I did use my anti-static powder bag on that black cardstock before stamping it down. I used some Versamark ink, and I'll be using some Hero Arts detailed white embossing powder. Off to the side, I do have my heat gun heating up to make sure it gets nice and hot. I'll remove any excess powder I don't want with a dry brush, and then I'll put back in the excess powder and heat set that. Cute stamp set this sentiment comes from. Now I pulled out some pretty pink Posh stitched strips dies, and I'm going to cut that out so it gives me that stitch edge on the banner part. So I'm running it through one way in my die cut machine, pull it out, and then run it through the other way as a way to center that sentiment perfectly. And I am using some painter's tape there to hold it in place while I do so. Thought about popping that up, but I decided to just go ahead and add it straight to my card base. I will pull out my T-square ruler to make sure that I get that perfectly straight. And a set of tweezers really helps too in your craft arsenal. So lastly, I pulled out some Lucy's Little Things sprinkles. I'm adding 3 white ones to the front of the card. I added one directly onto that acetate, and from being that the glue dries clear, it looks good from the back side. It doesn't look bad at all. So I'm just going to place a little dot on each of those using my jewel picker to help me place those down. And that glue dries very quickly too. So I always hand make an envelope to go with my cards just because I can match them how I want, and it's super simple using the We Are Memory Keepers envelope punch board. Here's a closer look. I just added my sentiment to the left side of the card on the inside, my personal note to my son. And here's the envelope punch board. So you just use the guide to cut out your paper, and then it'll give you where you start, where your score mark is, and after that you just keep rotating it and match up that little piece that's sticking out to your score mark and punch it. And then I'm also using the back side, it has a corner rounder, so I like to round my corners. And before I decide to put the envelope together, I'm going to stamp the front of it. So again, I'm going to treat it with the anti-static powder bag and use Versamark ink as well. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Sending Happy Thoughts stamp set. I'm stamping down the Happy Mail, the same detailed white embossing powder. I added a few more stamps to it. I didn't know I was going to, or else I would do it all at once. But I decided after stamping that down, I love the way it looks, so I wanted to add a few more to it. Otherwise, like I said, I should have just done this all at once, but it was an afterthought. I added the little envelope and a few of the hearts, or it's one heart rather, but I added 3 of them to it. And now I love the way that looks so much, so I decided to emboss my son's name and address and then my name and address on the back of the envelope as well. So I'm using this Emboss It pens. These are great. Purchased those from Amazon. Really good price. It comes with a black and a white or a clear embossing pen. I'm testing it out on a scrap piece of paper to see if I wanted to write my son's name on it, and I was happy with the detail that you can get from it. So I decided to go ahead and do that. Off camera, I added his address and I covered that up with a sticky note. And I also stamped the Deliver To right above it that comes in that same stamp set, and I was super happy with how this turned out. So now that I was done with my stamping, I'm going to crease on those folds, give them a good crease. Using some Beacon Fabri-Tac, I'm going to adhere that down. Once that dries, like I said, I do go ahead and add my name and address to the back flap. And then once the envelope was dry, I used some double-sided tape for the top flap to adhere it down. And that's all there was to it. So I hope you've enjoyed today's process. If you have any questions, leave me a comment, and I hope you consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.